Hello everyone. Now, if you ever wondered whether an increase in heat would create issues in employment, you are right up for the next session. Our speaker is now Mr. Jason Glaser. Please welcome Mr. Jason Glaser on stage. CEO, he is the CEO of Isla Network and climate and public health activist. Hello, Jason. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? I'm
I'm
actually
fine.
reaching you from the field in Nicaragua. We're carrying out field research right now.
Oh, that would be great. Jason, just give me the opportunity to introduce you to my audience. Okay?
Wonderful, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Jason Glaser is the founder and CEO of Isla Network, an occupational health research organization dedicated to ending heat-related illness, including chronic kidney disease from non-traditional causes among workers and the communities worldwide. His objective is to drive research and policy that facilitate understanding and prevention of occupational heat stress, a growing climate-related health risk of present world. Jason, we are eager to hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to the time when we can all be together, but I'm glad we were able to make this work. I think we should jump right into it because I'm guessing time is short and we'll have a more robust conversation once I get through the slides and the presentation. If the slides aren't up on your end, if the folks could bring them up in Bangladesh, that would be wonderful. And again, thanks everybody for attending. I'm really looking forward to this. This should be really appropriate for the folks that are probably able to make this meeting. I myself am right now in Nicaragua with my research colleagues and a sugar mill we work with on our research and our intervention programs. And so this should be quite apropos for the Americas, and then also for South Asia and East Asia, who I hope are able to make it right now, given the time. So without further ado, is the slideshow up on your end, Sarah? All right. Well, I hope it is. And
Yes, Jason, the slides are up.
Great, thank you. So La Isla Network, you may not have heard of us yet. We are been growing pretty rapidly over the last few years, but I think to summarize what we do is really about taking action based on research, academic research in the face of uncertainty. I think academic research can really frustrate a lot of us who have worked in business. My background was film production, actually, before I got into epidemiology and research. And I think what I've really tried to do is bring that operational capacity and the talent of my academic colleagues to really take action in the face of uncertainty under the precautionary principle. And we do that by taking leading occupational health interventions that address these core issues we've identified of heat stress in a changing climate and resulting kidney disease. So what I'm going to present you is based on years of research, really from a few main programs. We have the Adelante initiative, which in Spanish means to go forward. And that is in reference to the bad old days when we were raising awareness about this issue and research about this issue. And there's a lot of intractability in the industry, especially in the sugarcane industry. And that has really evaporated just over the last few years, thanks to partnerships with the industry and with the development communities, such as the Development Bank, the DEG, and the KfW in Germany. We also work with the BMZ and GIZ, and now the US Department of Labor through the Prep for Change program. And that's with the US Department of Labor, International Labor Affairs Bureau, and the Office of Trade and Labor. And then we have the NBEL, which is connecting a lot of research like ours through the European Commission through a set of grants that were given by the Belmont Forum on Climate Change. We've also done a lot of work with the Center for Disease Control, or actually we'll be doing a lot of work with the Centers for Disease Control on migrant workers in the United States. And we've done a lot of work with the Pan American Health Organization. And we have colleagues that we work with also at World Vision on a project in Mexico to improve worker health in the sugarcane industry there. So the problem that we're going to address tonight is that we really are dealing with an obvious one, right? The climate change is here. It's not something that's hypothetical. It is here. It is upon us. We have watched rising average high temperatures for many years. All around the world, and we saw the impact this summer really hit the US and the Pacific Northwest and also parts of Europe, which is a bit of a harsh reminder, I think, for people who thought they were safe, especially in the Pacific Northwest and Canada, the United States, that they are not. and that we really have to start taking these things seriously. And of course, it's not going to affect everybody equally. There's a group that's specifically really in trouble and has been for many, many years and requires immediate attention. And those are workers who do the hardest work, the hottest environments with the heaviest workloads. And they're really facing what we call occupational heat stress. And so I like to put it like this. If you can believe it, very smart people have come to me and said, oh, but Jason, how can these issues of heat stroke and kidney disease among workers be related to heat? It's been hot everywhere for a long time. Well, you know, we could all go to the beach and go surfing and enjoy Mai Tais, and I can guarantee most of us will be just fine for years on end. But what we're not doing are working like piece rate jobs or working in mining or heavy industry near blast furnaces, or cutting sugarcane where you're cutting 6 to 7 tons a day and paid by how much you cut. So what happens is you have this very high environmental temperature. Your body goes hotter and hotter and hotter because you are working so hard. And there's so much humidity and heat in the air and the environment that the heat in your body has nowhere to dissipate to. And it goes higher and higher and higher. And it sets off a chain of events, physiological events in your body. My background, I don't know if that was mentioned, is epidemiology, but I work with a team of physiologists, clinicians, nephrologists, toxicologists, and the rest. We really take a transdisciplinary approach to our work. And so we're one of the first to really realize what a risk this is, and the complete misunderstanding out there in the literature, or the bulk of the literature, about what this can do to the human body. And what we found, along with colleagues over really the last 12 years especially, there's a greater increase in accidents overall, early mortality due to things like kidney disease that we come from it. There's reduced productivity. People can't work as hard or as well when they're so overheated. And you have a much higher incidence of accidents in general, because if you've ever been really hot from playing sports or working hard yourself, you can know how dizziness and nausea can really lead to some accidents that would be otherwise avoidable. One of the worst outcomes that we've really identified, and we were the vanguard, we were the tip of the spear on this, and now this is widely accepted as being associated with heavy work in hot environments, but we had a long road ahead of us to get to this point. To show this was normal kidney disease is a problem all over the world, as many of you know, but it generally affects an older population. It's usually related to diabetes and hypertension, obesity. It's quite easy to screen for. You can have someone use a cup, put urine in the cup, their urine, take a dipstick, what's known as a dipstick, and see if they have protein in their urine. And it's a pretty good indicator of whether or not they have a problem. Now, with this form of kidney disease that we've identified from heavy work attached to things like exertional heat stroke and repeated heat injury and heat illness, it's very different. It disproportionately affects working age males because they're usually the folks doing these really heavy jobs, although we see more and more women affected as the job markets have changed. And it's most associated with strenuous labor without decent labor protections. And some of the hot spots, pun intended, have been Mesoamerica, Central America, South Asia, where the most research has been done. But we keep seeing it basically everywhere we look. Think of a Venn diagram of poor labor protection, very hot environment, really heavy work. So we see it in the southern US, we believe. We've definitely documented it in Indonesia, parts of Africa, Thailand. It looks like it's in Singapore as well among construction workers. And you'll hear a bit more of other places. Now, one of the biggest problems with this thing is that you have to test the serum creatinine. You have to take a blood draw to see if somebody has this disease, which means it's a bit more invasive and it's much harder to do surveillance for. So this thing really rode under the cover of poor surveillance globally for many, many years. So the burden of this disease we've identified through mapping studies of looking where the hot spots of kidney disease and the burden are in public health systems with routine data from the countries that were able to provide it. And then we overlaid that with high density sugarcane because it's such a heavy job in the lowlands where it is the hottest. So you really only saw it and associated with referral clinics that were either directly overlapped with the sugarcane or were places where migrant workers returned to. Like up here in the north, you see this area that's kind of not hot, but the migrant workers that supply that workforce are represented by those orange and yellow areas nearby. And the rest of the areas are pretty much a direct alignment. And you see very similar mapping we can show in South Asia and India, and similar things up in the northern part of Sri Lanka. And this is just a reminder for folks who might feel like they're all safe and well and don't need to worry about this in the supposedly more developed countries. A lot of these same populations that are so at risk because they're not really taken into account, like those bottom rung workers, that sugarcane cutter, that salt pan worker, that miner. These migrant workers that we have in the United States are often not particularly well treated. There's very poor surveillance, but a colleague of mine at the US Occupational Safety and Health Administration, actually a couple of my colleagues, Dr. Tustin and Dr. Weaver, did this work, and they're both trained at Johns Hopkins originally. And we see it very much clustering in the hottest parts of the US. This is acute kidney injury from heat illness. So this problem is something that we really need to take note of globally. But I encourage people to not just think of industries. If you read the literature, if you find this really interesting, you'll see a lot of the literature try to attach this only to agriculture, and that's just not the case. This is a fellow working down in the salt pans in Tamil Nadu down to Pondicherry, and these guys definitely have the issue. We are getting work going there to try to protect them, and there's some really great preliminary data with their colleagues in Chennai. And we see it in rice workers, gold miners, palm oil, open boat fishermen that haul in big nets for days on end, sugarcane and construction. One of the areas where we've really focused, and this is going to be a very big issue as we run up to the World Cup, is these Nepalese workers and other South Asian workers that have been working on the construction of the World Cup in Qatar, but also in the other Gulf states and Southeast Asia as well, in Malaysia. And they're returning home. The ones that don't die straight up from heat stroke, which have been over 6,500 just in Qatar, just for the World Cup in about a decade. The ones that don't die, too many of them are coming home in their 20s and 30s, and so young, and being removed from the workforce and being removed from being able to be a prime earner because they went to go fulfill a labor shortage and a labor surplus in Nepal. And instead of that being a win-win situation, what happens is the Nepalese worker comes back and he is sick and he has kidney disease and he becomes a burden on the household, on his health system, and he can't participate in the economy when all he did was try to go home with winnings from working abroad and making that sacrifice. So I think this really gets to the heart of, we need to do better with these kind of migration agreements we have between countries and make sure migrants are treated well when they do these kind of luxurious things like set up air-conditioned World Cup stadiums. Why now, you might ask? What's changed? Well, agriculture is really not the same as it was 30, 40 years ago. The industrialization of agriculture, the rise of monoculture, means that the work has become more intensive, not necessarily industrialized, but intensive. And that's led to more piece rate work to make quotas, to meet the demands of the marketplace. Of course, I've already mentioned an increase in research and surveillance. In India, in around 2011, they started looking at serum creatinine as an indication of kidney disease. And they said, oh, we have this new kidney disease. It's very unlikely it was new. It seemed to be identified actually in earlier Indian studies as early as the late 80s and 90s. In fact, in Tamil Nadu and near Chennai. And of course, the climate is getting warmer. The environment's getting warmer. So all this confluence has led to a problem where we can actually go back to countries that are in this tropical band, that are in where this happens, like Costa Rica, that have a really pretty good centralized health system, where we can look at the age-adjusted mortality and the hottest department, which also happens to be the hottest department that is also the biggest grower of intensive sugarcane. And we see a very clear correlation. That blue line are men from that department and their age-adjusted mortality due to kidney disease. And it's a very close R and match in a linear regression to the land under sugarcane production, intensive sugarcane production over 40 years. But you can see, by 1980, it's already almost a double risk for people compared to men in the rest of the country in the dotted blue line. And you can see also women are more affected in that department as well. But it's really those working age men that are getting kind of eviscerated by this. And Costa Rica's been very useful because the neighboring countries went through a lot of civil strife going back to the 70s and 60s, and the health systems weren't as developed. So Costa Rica gave an insight that this isn't really new, but this is getting worse. One thing I think is really important to think about when you're thinking about this disease as well is it's really about frequency, intensity of injury. So people might think about, oh, what about a marathon runner or an adventure racer or a Navy SEAL that really works hard in high heat frequently? Well, we've worked with the US Army. We work with some of the top sports physiologists in the UK and the US. And we've basically have found that the sugarcane cutter works as hard as an adventure racer or a military operator, special forces operator on a 3-day deployment, except they're not doing it, once a month or a few times a year or even every week. They're doing this 6 to 7 days a week. And there's many jobs like this that do that straight for 6 months a year or all year. And so it's really about that frequency of the damage. And there's a wonderful article by an Indian researcher, Mansoor, who kind of unpacked that and looked at marathon runners and saw worrying signs and looked at the work we do and said, well, the difference here seems to be that frequency. So what are the costs? This is kind of the problem, the background. What are we facing? Well, the costs are pretty brutal. I mean, this photo, I work with Ed Cashy from National Geographic to try to kind of bring it down to earth for people, away from the statistics and the numbers and the confidence intervals we deal with as epidemiologists. What does this mean for a society? What does this mean for a community? So this is in Nicaragua, and this fellow's actually already gone. He's already dead in his 30s, but he was in his early 30s when this photo was taken, and or his kid are going to eventually have to replace him in the field to make ends meet. And he's taken out of the economy, and it forces this really nasty cycle to repeat itself for generations. And what we've seen are things like 93% of no formal source of financial assistance in communities that are affected by this disease. So there's a pretty large failing from the public system, but also the private development system. And it's left widows and mothers who have outlived their sons repeatedly. These 2 young guys died in their 20s. And that's in Nicaragua. I've actually was probably in that field today. And this is a big one. I mean, I've already touched on this, right? But treatment is out of reach for most people. The treatment that's available is really not safe for most. It's a home, what's called peritoneal dialysis. People are very prone to infection. I really call into question the wisdom, or even, I'm just going to say it, the decency of big firms like Baxter providing that kind of treatment in these kind of conditions. They make a lot of money from the public systems, the public health systems of these countries trying to do something about it. But the mortality and morbidity rates due to infection are often higher than due to the disease. It's a real problem. And so again, what that means is this guy's only 35. He clearly looks much older. But that kid is going to have to leave school to help make ends meet. And that means he's going to enter that field around 11, 12, 13 years of age when he has to work kind of undercover in the informal sector because he can't get a straight contract because he's underage. The legal age of working in Nicaragua is 18. And he is going to have years and years of exposure to that heat stress and that kidney damage before he ever enters the workforce. So in a few short years, once he's in the system, he will already be sick and often not work enough years to qualify for Social Security when he falls ill. So all these knock-on effects because we weren't protecting people. And this is a big one. This young guy is also sick, having too many kids. He's got 2 kids, another on the way, but what that does is really in-debt people. And what it forces is a lot of loans, and the interest rates are quite high. And this fellow, he was a good friend of mine, community leader, former Sandinista guerrilla, actually, fascinating guy. And he died of fungal peritonitis from his flawed home dialysis system. Well, here's a kicker, though. It's not just the communities that are losing money. We've done an ROI with the mill that we're working with on the Adelante initiative. It's a mill in Nicaragua called Ingenio San Antonio. And they turned over all their financial documents to us. And our transdisciplinary research includes labor economists and other economists and organizational psychologists. And we found that there's a 22 to 30% ROI, depending on which metrics we include. On the conservative side is 22. So 22 cents on dollar that you invest in protecting people and taking this issue on, and you win. But if you don't, you're functionally losing money due to, frankly, short-sightedness. So what am I talking about the ROI? What's the investment? Well, it's the solution. And the solution is pretty refreshingly simple in concept. Of course, we all know practice is harder, especially on something like a 70,000 or 140,000 hectare sugar mill. But it's really about well-implemented interventions of hydration, rest in shade. And why is that important? Because what we have found that people with elevated core temperatures who work in the heaviest jobs and get beyond 38 degrees for sustained periods during their workday are those that are the most injured. Their kidneys are the most injured, and they're most likely to develop disease. So you see these cane cutters, the guys that cut the burn cane, the guys that cut the green cane into seed packets. These are your most affected. So that's our objective. We've measured people's core temperature using wearables, using straps, using digestible pills that pass through your digestive system, but while they're in you, they broadcast your core temperature to a reader. It's quite interesting. And we can actually see where we've provided breaks throughout the day, mandated breaks, where you keep the core temperature down into a healthy level. So that's really what the work's all about. Hydration's important, but mandated breaks under shade is really the key part. So these are our fundamentals, right? The question is, how are things like mandated breaks under shade with things like water and isotonic beverages and places to use the bathroom safely for women who are increasingly entering the workforce, how are these basic things missing for so long in major development projects? I mean, some of the biggest commodity supply chains, right? Sugar, palm oil, rice. And these were not being considered when people provided loans. But the great thing is we can now ensure those protections through our systems of the Adelante Initiative and the PREP program, which is prevention, resilience, efficiency, and protection. And the aspects of the program, again, are pretty simple, right? It's a mobile canopy that keeps you close to the workforce, at least in the sugarcane sector, insulated personal water coolers, 2 coolers at least under every tent for the workers that get their mandated breaks, and one's containing water and one's containing an isotonic beverage. But you can have a really well-designed program, right? That's like simple, efficient, easy, relatively easy to implement. But if it's not well implemented because of a lack of training or a lack of buy-in through different parts of the management chain, then it's really not going to matter, right? It's like if I'm your MD and I tell you, sir, madam, you've got high blood pressure. I'm going to give you this pill and it should rectify your problem, but you don't take your pill all the time, you're still going to have high blood pressure. So that we call that adherence in epidemiological studies to see how successful a trial might be. So that design or that intervention might be quite effectively designed, or the pill might be quite effectively made. But if the adherence or the implementation isn't effective, well, it doesn't really matter. And you can get what's a false positive or a false negative. So using the data we've collected over time about core temperature, about understanding what's viable for the workforce by talking to supervisors and occupational health experts at these sugar mills, we basically have evolved the design of the program. So over time, we realized people get hot much earlier than we would think, even before the environmental temperature is so high, and you begin these programs earlier to intervene. And then things like implementation, if you look at most of the literature and you look at how people assess the implementation of programs, it's a bit of finger in the air sometimes. So what we've done is developed a fairly sophisticated set of algorithms to assess implementation of the program. And this is just a few examples. But the idea is to actually make that an exposure that we can measure. And the great thing is the people that are doing the questionnaire or the surveying tool, they never have to see that algorithm. I wouldn't do that to anybody. That'd just be mean. What they do are basically like, how far away is the tent? How many workers are under the tent? How long did they stay? Did people stay under the tent for the entirety of the break? And some really simple questions, but that all gets translated in the back end into the algorithm, and we can kind of highlight, where are the management holes. So I think that kind of thing has a lot of application elsewhere, otherwise. ISA is the mill that we work with, LAN is us, and you can see that implementation is a shared challenge. Like they have a bit of a long way to go, but the nice thing is, even though we're a little bit harder on them than they are on themselves, which is kind of typical, that's fine, that doesn't bother me so much. But if you look at the green, it's pretty clear that everybody thinks they had a long way to go. And that fault of implementation early on really had impacts. So the first year, we just observed they had their own homegrown intervention, and they had a lot of kidney injury, a lot of damage still. Now, the next harvest, we introduced improvements. And with the burnt cane cutters, we really brought down the incidence of disease, but we didn't see much of a change in the seed cutters, the guys that cut the green seed. And that was interesting because what had happened was just there was a cultural bias within the organization that the seed cutters were not as affected as the burn cane cutters with the kidney disease and heat stroke and acute kidney injury. This wasn't the case, it wasn't true. But that was the bias. So they were getting short shrift. They were not getting paid attention to. And so then we did the analysis of the implementation, and we saw that actually, if you looked at the best implementation, we had basically eliminated the problem. Whereas the burn cane cutters had pretty equal implementation across the groups because the first year was so bad. And this gets into the nitty gritty a bit of like why these things aren't easy and why we shouldn't just be like, okay, I'll have a tent and I'll have some water and everything will be fine and I do not worry about this. Well, we should, because again, these are kind of living, breathing machines, these companies. I mean, if you've ever seen a sugar mill in action, it's kind of an incredible ballet of heavy equipment over several thousand hectares. And you know what happened that year was 2 mechanized harvesters went down, and a mechanized harvester can equal anywhere between 80 and 140 sugarcane cutters. And I'm setting you guys up for a really great question about mechanization, but I'll let you ask it. Is a real problem because they tried to disperse the protective equipment between the new hires to replace those 2 John Deeres that literally blew up because of the heat. But here's the good news. As we increased the efficacy and the importance of that implementation and people really started to integrate the program, we got rid of hospitalized acute kidney injury due to heat stroke, which is huge because this is something that is very expensive for health systems, very expensive for the public system to manage, and has knock-on effects because about 10% of every person, of every, 10% of people who get an acute kidney injury from an exertional heat stroke will go on to have kidney disease in just 6 months to a year. So it's exceedingly important to get rid of this. And it looks like we almost have. Like in just a few short years, we already brought it down by 94%. But here's the kicker, and this shouldn't be surprising to some of you, but a positive return on investment, which is what everybody asks for at conferences, even though we're talking about human lives and human livelihood, there's always that kind of boring question of, oh, what's the ROI? Well, the ROI is almost always better when you have interventions because there's things like the Hawthorne effect, and it encourages communication between departments. And it's always this kind of same story that everybody's surprised by. Oh, we treat people better, and we do better. But it's always a question. But it's not enough, and neither was the reduction in health impacts. So we show a reduction in the negative health impacts. We show a positive ROI, but there's still implementation problems. So what do? We bring in the organizational psychologist, and we do a really great organizational management assessment, and we kind of understand where the blocks are, where the biases are, and we begin changing what people are managed on. So people become managed on the exposures that are of concern, and that becomes an exposure for us to measure. And they're also now managed on the health outcomes of the workforce. And it's about 15% of the yearly review of each position for the supervisors and the people in different departments. And this isn't just occupational health. This is the field supervisors, the harvest department, logistics. Everybody takes a role now in looking after each other's health and the workforce's health. It's a sense of responsibility. It's not like, oh, the workers drink too much. Oh, maybe they're smoking, or who knows what they do at home. That has become irrelevant to this organization. And I think that's the correct attitude. What can we do while these workers are here earning money for the 8 to 12 hours they're working with us? That's just a total shift in attitude. Not looking for excuses, not looking for the maybes. What can we control? What can we own? And what can we encourage in our employees and our management to have a better outcome? And it's really been effective. And of course, part of that is really effective education and communication. And that's consistent, repeated education from the board level all the way down to the workforce. And we do that. And the level of communication we have between researchers and support at La Isla Network and these companies is I basically insist to get to know the CEO, because unless there's buy-in from the top, I find it really doesn't work. And in this case with the sugar mill we work with, I'm great friends with the upper management and members of the board, and nobody would have thought that was possible a few years ago. So we study these things in the occupational setting, be it pesticide exposures, heat stress, or other things that you might see in the occupational setting. Because it's an opportunity, once you get systems in place for assessment and improvement, to apply to other geographies and industries. And in fact, we're getting to do that through support from the US government in the coffee sector and the maquiladora, the textile sector. And we've gotten people like, and organizations like Coca-Cola and Adidas to sign on. So this is a real sea change shift. And it really started with the work that we're doing with colleagues in Mexico and the work we started in Nicaragua. And that's now informing these new attitudes to other crops and other commodities and other industries, now like textile. And we've done that by really considering the stakeholders, because nothing happens in a vacuum, right? We think about the workers in the communities. We get our data from the community level, from the firm level, and from the worker level, and we get the health data from all those places and the economic data. And then we, when it's possible, we have a favorable government. We also get the routine data from their labor and health ministries. And then that helps us really understand what's really going on, what the barriers are, and how to create as many win-wins as possible, and really balance everybody's interests. But our main metric, and we've been pretty successful in encouraging other peoples to make it the metric, are people's health. So I've come up with some considerations for the banks. I hope they're useful. But this is what we've started to encourage with the development banks, like the DEG and the Inter-American Development Bank. And we hope the International Finance Corporation will follow suit with the DEG as well in Germany. But you really have to assess risk in the current portfolio that you have, and also in future clients and projects. And we can support that. We have mapping systems that can look at different industries and different locations and let you know if this would be a risk in those loans. And we can provide support for clients that might be interested to address these risks. And we're really happy to do that. And we've even encouraged people to consider things like making loans contingent on occupational health interventions if they're needed, and assessment over the life of the loan. And we've done a version of that already with the DEG, so this isn't pie in the sky. We got a program started, and the success of the program was measured over 3 years, and this really helped them understand the organization they were loaning to, and that was the sugar mill, and it's strengthened the relationship, not weakened it. So in short, it's really about assessing and addressing this risk in particular that I'm talking about today. And it really will have knock-on effects, because you'll no longer be taking working age primary earners out of the workforce in their 20s and 30s and early 40s. And that's really not gonna, that's gonna be a huge positive impact, because you're no longer gonna be burdening health systems, households, and local economies trying to treat a disease that is preventable. I mean, this disease really is preventable, and these emergency treatments for acute kidney injury are preventable. So if you can alleviate that burden on the health system, on the public system, but also on the primary earner and the employer, if they have to pay into Social Security, it's really just kind of common sense, good practice. So I want to thank you a lot. Thanks so much for having us. Thank you to the participants that take part in our research, the international local research teams we work with. I really got to thank the German GIZ, DEG, and BMZ, and the US Department of Labor, because they came forward first to support this when a lot of people are saying no, and they were really brave, frankly. And to ISA, the Ingenio San Antonio, who made this work possible, the sugar mill that we first started this work. And together, we're just taking action in the face of uncertainty to save lives and improve livelihoods and improve communities. I hope this has been useful for you.
Thank you, Jason. It was very informative and useful presentation. Just to inform you, I am from Bangladesh, so I can very much connect to the facts like only a bread earner is getting sick, the child has to enter the workforce, the family is getting from poorer to even poorer, and then they do not have any access to the formal financial institution or bank, so they have to take loan from the community fund at the very high rate, which eventually they actually cannot pay at the end of the day. So this is a very upsetting situation in Bangladesh as well. I would
Sarah, I don't want to interrupt, but I do want to support what you're saying, and maybe this is a great point to get something going together. Tom Cummings and I have talked about it, but there's such a deficit of data in Bangladesh, and why would it not be occurring, right? We see it happening in the Gulf, we see it happening in all these places. It most definitely is. I mean, I shouldn't say that as a scientist. My hypothesis would be that it's occurring there. And it would be wonderful to maybe work with Brock and others to figure out if it is, and then figure out a pilot. We would love to do that. So yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, so you were talking about the heat stress regarding working outside. So we have many day laborers, and a very great percentage is actually female. So what is the percentage for women to get this sickness in comparison to male? So is the chance is less or higher?
They're a little bit less, and I think there's a couple of reasons for it. Females tend to manage heat a little bit better, so there's a little bit of an advantage there, and nobody really knows why. But also, you know, testosterone in men, they're able to work a little bit harder, and their heart rate will go higher. But saying that, they also get in better condition faster. So like the women will have a higher BMI, we notice in Nicaragua with the women who do enter the workforce, and but there's not real clarity on that. There is a differential, but women are definitively at risk. Like women who enter this workforce definitely
a bit less, maybe because their internal heat management system is a bit better.
I think you might be right. And we're trying to figure that out, but there is a differential. There is one. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm inviting questions from our audience, and before that, I would also like to ask. Okay, let us take the question from Matthew Gamser. So, should I read you for it, Jason?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the small holder question. Oh. Yeah, we're working on that right now. It's really, yeah. Matthew, yeah, you win a prize for this one. So we're actually working with what are called the colonos in Nicaragua. And 5 years ago, when I would tell like a medium holder, a small holder, like you should work on this, and the contractors, they would just kind of laugh you out of the room or laugh you out of the field. That's completely changing. I actually went to a colono 2 days ago, like an outgrower, small holder that supplies the mill. And so the one side of it is all the contractors, every single one of the workers said, I'm in. That was amazing. The mill we work with, remember I told you about that sense of responsibility that's kind of rare? They're not looking for that other thing, the mysteries that are left. They're like, what can we do with what we know? That's a big shift. They are going out to the colonos and already doing a pilot program. We're looking to get funding through the DEG and others to subsidize the transition. But they're already building health dossiers on subcontracted workers on the colonos. One of my conditions for working with this sugar mill was they directly contract all the workers on their 35,000 hectares. They source from another 35,000 hectares. And now they are taking the step, okay, we feel like we got our house in order. We're going to help other people get theirs. And that's a shift. So Matthew, this is it. Like if we can get one supply chain in the world for a main commodity completely cleaned up, it would be truly radical. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Nobody's ever done it. I can't think of it ever being done. And we're taking the first steps here in Nicaragua. So that's super interesting. That's a great question. Now, Nicaragua is kind of easy. 137 sources for that one mill that crushes 20,000 tons a day. Same size mill in El Salvador, 2,500 sources. Mexico, that's going to be the K2 to climb. That's going to be the Everest to climb, because that's like 5,000 to 6,000 sources. So it's a great question. It's a great point. It is very much kicking it down the supply chain, but we seem to have a really good start here in Nicaragua with this mill. Thanks. Great question. I saw a comment from Apendra, and Apendra, I'm actually going to be in Nepal the week of New Year's. So maybe earlier in that week, if you're there, I'd be happy to meet you. My email is jason@laislanetwork.org. But yeah, we're going because we're really very, any data you read in The Guardian or anyone else who's covered the deaths, we've been the guys in the background crunching the numbers for The Guardian. So we're very familiar with it. We've been very bothered by it. And yeah, it's a real problem. The ones who aren't dying seem to be coming back en masse with this kidney disease. So Pendra, I'm very happy to chat about that more and see what we can do.
Thank you, Jason. I'd also ask your perspective on another thing that, in Bangladesh, our RMG sector is huge, right? Ready-made garment sector. Many people are working there, mainly the women and young women.
Yes.
So what do you say about their risk exposure regarding this sort of illness, kidney disease for
Yeah.
non-traditional causes? So what's your view? And
My
what's
view
your
is,
advice actually?
well, the humble part of me says I don't know yet because we just got the grant and they kind of felt tacked on. They're like, we want you to work in sugarcane and the textile industry. we're coming in as hygienists and epidemiologists, something a bit new. One thing that struck me, and you're familiar with this, the average age, and this is in Vietnam to Bangladesh to El Salvador, which we're going to start. The average age to leave that workforce is 26, and that really struck me.
I think for our RMG sector, it's even less. It's actually around 19 to 22, our average age for the employees in the RMG sector, the laborers actually, the garments workers.
Yeah, this was the average age of when they have to leave because they can't keep up anymore because of injuries. So I thought about the repetitive injuries and the consequence of the chronic disease. There's actually a similarity, being removed from the workforce early, not being able to enter it. So there's some similarities there. Now the heat stress question, we don't know, but we have to suspect because of that piece rate system. And this is why we have sanitation. We have latrines and washing stations in the field, because if you're asking women to drink more water, drink more isotonic beverage, well, they have to have a place to go and they have to have these mandated breaks so they have a time to go, right? Because men could just
maybe there is not external heat stress, but there is
yes.
I think suffocation because in a place too many people. So internal heat, I think it's getting higher for this.
I think, and also the screen printing rooms are really hot. So we're concerned about them, but we're going to find out. We've got Adidas to agree. They've got a number of suppliers in El Salvador. And I'm specifically, to your point, because we don't know, but it's a really good hunch, selecting the ones that are in the lowlands, not in the highlands, because they're hotter, and to see what it is. And I think that why I mentioned the need to use the bathroom is if you don't pee, that can also cause problems. Sorry to be so blunt. So to really look at the sanitation needs along with the heat stress, and to also look at that repetitive injury similar to the chronic kidney disease in the sense that it pulls primary earners out of the workforce so young. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes, after your having your presentation, I'm just a bit worried that maybe all these workers are actually suffering from the kidney diseases, but because of their financial condition, they are not even getting tested. So the cases are not being reported actually.
Yeah.
So it could be the case.
Well, I think I told you, like, I have a couple stories for the audience that you guys might enjoy from both parts of the world that are probably able to attend. I was in London, but it was a Guatemalan ambassador to London. So, and this is about 6 years ago. And this guy, I do my thing, and he gets on stage and just total non sequitur. He's like, we don't have this kidney disease that they have in El Salvador. And of course they do. It's like very well known now. We're working in Guatemala a few short years later. And in Mexico, similar thing. This guy got up and said, oh, Mexican workers, they're lazy. They drink too much tequila. Unbelievable. Mexican man used racism of gringos to support bad practices. My head exploded. And I was like, I'm going to do a study in Mexico. And we did, and it was there. So I think actually, it is about surveillance.
People are not aware of that. Yes, and you were saying about the effective communication for the study group and the organizations. Yeah. Actually, for the countries like us, it is very much important to spread the awareness among the general people as well, because they are not recognizing the symptoms, they are not getting tested. So they are not starting the medication or treatment in the early
So one group that we're working with is Nova Biomedical, and they make really good point of care devices, and that could help close the healthcare gap, because you could at least diagnose this with just a pinprick. Like, I don't need to take people's blood and analyze it in a lab all the time. If I can just use the biomarker to know how people are doing over a work period, over a harvest, cross shift, then we can intervene faster, to your point. And we're even thinking about building the surveillance systems using these point of care devices that give you immediate results without sounding like Elizabeth Holmes. It's one marker, not everything. They work.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, I could listen to you all day. It's so mesmerizing, but for the sake of time, we have to end here. So thank you, Jason. I believe your talk has worked as an awakening to resolve many important issues in the area and inspired many of us to take individual level initiatives. Thank you very much, and thank you, the audience, for the comments and the questions.
Sarah, thanks so much. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you. After around 15 minutes, we will again meet in this platform to learn from Mr. Hensi Gonzalez. So please do not miss the session. Please join after 15 minutes. See you.